Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we are going to learn about Azure Resource Manager template or ARM. We will learn what is ARM and how to use ARM templates to provision your infrastructure with Azure. Hi, my name is Rakesh Suryavanshi and you are watching Be a Learner. This is the objective of our today's discussion. We will learn what is Azure Resource Manager template, how it works, what are the different deployment scopes available with ARM template, and then we'll know about the template of the ARM template ARM structure. And at the last, I'll give you some demonstration to create your infrastructure with ARM. Before I begin the discussion, it's my humble request to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I have lots of videos uploaded on the different topics. We can go through all of them if needed. Without getting further delay, let's begin the discussion. Let's first of all understand why do we need Azure Resource Manager template. So we know that in Azure there are multiple ways to provision your infrastructure. You can use Azure Portal or the tools like PowerShell, Azure CLI, or even the REST API to provision the infrastructure in Azure. Nowadays, we would like to automate each and everything, including your infrastructure. The reason behind that is you may want to perform a repetitive actions for your infrastructure. For example, the similar identical infrastructure you want to provision in the dev environment, non-prod environment, and the production environment without getting any differences of the configuration. And that's the reason we would like to automate the infrastructure. And that is a primary reason you may want to use the tools like Azure Resource Manager templates. So Azure Resource Manager templates are the templates provided by Microsoft Azure, which you can use to write your infrastructure as code with the help of a declarative language provided by the Microsoft. This particular language is been written in the JSON format. So basically, this is a JSON declarative language which you use to interact with Azure to provision your infrastructure. When you pass on the JSON declarative language to the Azure resource provider, the provider basically checks for the authentication first, and then if the providers are enabled in your Azure subscription, you would be able to provision the desired infrastructure. This is a simple deployment screenshot wherein we are trying to deploy a virtual network in our Azure subscription. So this is how the deployment looks like. You can go to the you can have a look at the deployment status at the overview, and then here in the left section you could have these sections like input, output, and you can also view the entire template which is being used for this particular deployment. I'll show you where exactly you can find this particular deployment in your Azure portal. Let's try to understand the scope of the ARM templates. So when you use the ARM template to provision your infrastructure, there are various scope which you can use while running your ARM template. For example, you can deploy the ARM template with the scope of Azure Resource Group, or you can deploy it at the subscription level, or it could be at the tenant level or the management level. To explain more, I would like to show you the Microsoft documentation which they have given about the deployment scope. So here at the docs.microsoft website, you can find the ARM template scope details. Like you can see at the left hand side panel, you have the various scope options such as the resource group, subscription, management, and the tenant level. It says that there are multiple ways you can define the scope of your deployment. Now, let's try to understand the Azure Resource Manager template structure. So, like I said, Azure Resource Manager template are basically a declarative language written in the, or you can write in the JSON format. So the JSON format has a particular JSON structure which you need to use to provision your infrastructure. For example, the template of the JSON structure has four different sections. You could have the parameters, variables, resources, and the output. So the parameters basically are the values which you would like to pass or override while calling your resource manager templates. So these could be the values of the different properties. For example, let's say if I would like to create a SQL server, the parameters could be what could be the name of the SQL server, resource group name, location name, SKU, like that. So those are the value which I may want to override while deploying the parameter, while deploying a particular SQL resource manager template onto the various environment. So if that's a need, you can use or define the parameters and then pass or override those parameters while calling the ARM templates. Next, you have the variables. Scope of the variable remains local to the templates. Like in any programming language, you have the global variables which can be used outside the boundary of the class once you initiate, and then you have the local variables which can be exist within the class or within the method. Similarly, here in the variables, basically you define or declare the variable in the ARM template which you can use within the template itself. It cannot be used outside the template. You can't pass the variable values while calling the template. So that's the difference between the variables and the template. I'll show you in a moment how the overall structure looks like. Next, you have the resources template itself. So this is the resource section which is defines the metadata of the resource which you want to provision with Azure. So you could have a resource section which has the, let's say, resource to define the network interface, virtual machine, data disk, and some other properties to provision your virtual machine. Within the resource, you could also have the blocks like depends on, which can define the dependency of the resources. For example, my network interface is always I would like to provision first before I provision the virtual machine itself. It means my virtual machine is depends on the network interface which I am going to create with this particular template. And next you have the output variables which you can use within the ARM template if you would like to return any output attribute as a result of your ARM template execution. For example, I may want to return the primary key of the storage account after provisioning the storage account with the help of my ARM template. That's one of the example. Apart from these four sections, you have various number of built-in functions supported or the function support available within the ARM template which you can use to write your ARM templates more robust. This is a simple JSON template structure for a resource block wherein we are trying to create a storage account. Here you can see that we have a type wherein we are specifying what type of resource we are trying to provision with the ARM template. Next, you have the API version. Like I said, these are the JSON templates which interacts with the Azure resource provider, and then when it interacts with the provider, it interacts with the management plane and it uses the management URI to have the interaction, and that's the reason these two important parameters requires to interact. Okay, this is what I'm trying to do and this is the version I need to use to perform the action, and then you can pass on the some of the required parameters such as the name, in this case location, resource group, and things like that, like SKU and the other properties if maybe you want to. Once you pass this resource block as in JSON format, like you can see this is a JSON format. Once you pass the JSON format and call the Azure Resource Management Deployment CLI command, basically that particular CLI takes the JSON as an input and create a JSON body and call the REST API call to the Azure Resource Manager management plane to interact or to provision the infrastructure. As you can see here, the JSON which we have structured in the previous slide, this has been converted as a request body and it has been sent to the management.azure.com. This is the URL, which is basically a management plane for the provisioning of the infrastructure. This is how the flow of the infrastructure provision looks like with ARM template. Now, let's look at the demonstration of the ARM template deployment from the Azure portal. Actually, before I go to the demonstration, I would like to describe the management plane which I have mentioned in the discussion. So here in the management plane, with Azure, you have two different types of plane. One is the control plane and the data plane. So control plane is responsible for creating the resources, whereas the data plane is basically performing any read-write operation on a particular data resource. For example, control panel for a storage account could be creation of a storage account into the Azure portal, whereas the data plane for the storage account could be writing and reading the blobs data into the storage account. Similarly, with the SQL Server, a control plane could be creation of the SQL Server resource itself, whereas writing queries into the database could be the data plane for the SQL Server. So these are the different types. These are the two different plane type available. The way control plane execution happens, it happens through the HTTPS management.azure.com if you are using Azure Global. If you are using Azure Government, then it is going to be management.usgo API.net, or if it is Germany, it's Microsoft Azure.de, or if it is China, then you have the China specific subdomain. But the point here is, if you are trying to provision the specific resources through the control plane, it goes via the call of the management.azure.com. And then when you call or you perform a read-write operation to a specific resource, it goes to a call of a REST API to a specific resource type, and then it will perform the operation with that REST API. Let's try to understand the resource manager template or the ARM template from the Azure portal. So in the beginning of the discussion, I have mentioned that when you execute the ARM template deployment, that deployment basically available here in the resource group section under the settings at the deployment settings. So whatever deployments you run, that particular deployment can be available here at this particular section. Similarly, if I go to the subscription, then the same settings you have at the subscription level as well, wherein you can find the deployment if the scope is at the subscription level. Now, in the presentation, I have mentioned that the way Azure Resource Manager template works, you call the ARM template www.management.azure.com. It sends a call to the resource provider, which is configured in your Azure subscription. So within the Azure subscription, you have so many providers available, most of them. So in order to provision a particular resource within the subscription, you need to register for that provider. For example, if I would like to create the data factory type of resource, then I need to have a Microsoft.data factory provider registered. If that particular provider is not been registered, and if I'm trying to provision the infrastructure with any automation tool like ARM or Terraform, basically it will reject my request or REST API call from the management plane that this particular resource provider is not being allowed to provision the resource of this type. So that's the reason you have to have the resource provider register before you try to provision the resource. So that's the relationship you need to understand. Okay, you could have the resource manager template scope at the management level as well. You can see that this is the management group level, and you can define this group scope at the management group level here as well. And one of the scope level I have mentioned about the tenant level as well. So the tenant level scopes are basically the type of operation you perform from the automation point of view. For example, you may want to perform a role assignment operation to a specific resource. For example, you may want to assign a contributor access to a SQL server. You may want to assign a Azure Key Vault secret user role to a particular user to get the secret access to within the key vault. So these are the kind of a role assignment operation. If you perform those kind of operation from the ARM template, then those template scope has to be from the tenant plane only, tenant type only. Okay, this is how it is. Now let's see how do we create a resource template. To create provision a resource within the Azure portal with the help of ARM template. You can go to click here, create resource, and search for template, for example, and select this option, deployment using template, and you can see that it's going to use the ARM template. Here are some quick templates which are available, which you can choose if you want to. And then let's say if I choose a particular virtual machine template, then it will have an entire infrastructure ARM template available given to me to provision the infrastructure template. Now if I have my own ARM template to provision any specific resource, for example, or storage account, then in that case, I can click this particular option and write my own ARM template. So I'll just copy this template to create this storage account. I'll click here, build your own template. I'll paste the entire template here, or if I want to write it, I can write it here. So like I have described in the presentation, that the structure of the ARM template you have is you have the variables, you have the parameters, you have the resource, and then if I have the output type, then that will also display here. So you can see that this is what the structure looks like. Now if I paste it here, you can see that it has automatically given the resource type and fill in all these blocks. Like I have 8 parameters. These are the different parameters: locations, access tier, and then I have the variables as well, one of the variable which is being used, and then we have the resource block. So this is our resource block to provision the storage account, which is using this variable to set the name, and these are the parameters which you can override while provisioning the infrastructure. So you can basically set it to the quick template. You can download the template file here. If I save, then based on the template structure which I have defined, like you can see that we have these are the 8 different parameters which you need to pass. Here the scope right now, you can see that the scope at the moment by default is the resource group level. So you need to specify for under which resource group I would like to run the Azure Resource Manager template. So let's say if I select this 5-day demo, it selects the location or a region based on my resource group itself. But if you want to overwrite, you can overwrite. So once you populate these values, I'm just giving some hypothetical values, and then it will validate the template with the values, depends upon the type of value it can expect. And then you can, once you click create, basically it will call the management.azure.com control plane, and then you would be able to provision the infrastructure. For example, if I run it, you can see that this is the deployment templates looks like, which I have shown here presentation. Now obviously it has failed because I might not have provided a correct value, which you can look at the value. So you can see that account type is LRS is invalid. You can check the storage account details, what is the correct value you should have. And this is the unique resource management deployment ID, or to check the details. Again, I can check the error here, which you can find the more detail about the template. If you would like to, let's say, rerun the template or modify the template, you can click on the, or you can check the different output operation which you have performed. You can check the entire template as well. And now if you would like to redeploy, you can redeploy it right here from this particular section. And once you are happy with your template which you have provisioned, you can add to the library, and so that you would have a library of different templates which you can use it to define your infrastructure. And even if in fact you can use these templates with the blueprint to Azure blueprint to provision your infrastructure with the blueprints as well. Okay, this is number one. Now let's check the storage account. Let's check our resource group and see if we have anything failed here. So yes, as you can see here, we have a failed deployment which is being scoped to the resource group, and you can see that the deployment details I can find here as well. The deployment has been triggered at this particular time and it has been failed, and I can check the similar details which I was able to find it over there. So this is how you can basically view the template. You can manage your ARM template for the deployment. Even just to let you know, like I said, even though if you use the Azure portal manually to provision the infrastructure, basically it behind the scene, it uses ARM template to provision your infrastructure. Now, just to give you an idea, I could also search for resource, and then you could go to the resource explorer within your subscription, and from this resource explorer you can find the ARM template which of your resources which you have deployed. So for example, within the subscription I have this particular resource group, and within this resource group I have a key vault resource defined. So I would like to basically check the detail of this ARM template, and if I would like to modify, I can modify it by opening the resource.azure website. I can modify the ARM template as well. So I'll just give you an idea. So if you search for, if you use the resource.azure.com, you would get the similar option which you can see here in the portal. So here is the subscription, here is the resource group, here are the resource groups and the different resources. This is how the key vault resource group looks like. I could change this by selecting these option from read only to read write, and you can see that this resource has been provisioned from the control plane of the management.azure.com, your subscription details, and then the resource group and the resource API version which you have provided while calling your ARM template. And that's the reason we were passing the. So this is about how do you use the Azure Resource Manager template from Azure portal. You also have the other different options like Azure CLI, Azure PowerShell, which you can use for the deployment of the Azure template. So you can see that this is the documentation of Azure CLI, which you can use the Azure deployment create command to use to run the deployment. It has various parameters which you can pass. For example, you can pass the template file, which is your ARM file, and then you can pass the different parameters as well from the parameter section. But this was the scope of this particular discussion. So we have learned what is Azure Resource Manager template, how the structure of this ARM template looks like, how it works, and how do you use the ARM template in Azure portal or in Azure CLI. In the next video, we will learn about Azure Bicep, which uses Azure Resource Manager, which is a declarative language to write your ARM template with the more control on your programming. For now, that's it on this video. I hope you find it useful. If it is, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give it a thumbs up. See you in the next video. Thanks for watching.